Everyone, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out for the second installment in our Economic Liberty Lecture Series. Tonight we're very fortunate to have James Bovard as our speaker, and I'd like to thank the Future Freedom Foundation for making this possible. Without them, we wouldn't be able to have this. Now I'm going to introduce Bart Frazier now. He's going to give us some words on James Bovard. So let's give a round of applause for the Future Freedom Foundation.
How you doing? Well, welcome to the second installment of the Economic Liberty Lecture Series. I'd like to thank you all for coming. This is an event co-sponsored by the Future Freedom Foundation and the George Mason University Economic Society. And we'd like to thank Kevin Hilferty, president of the society, and all the members here for helping out. We could not put this on without you. A lot of work that goes into this that you guys don't see, and it's a lot of hard work. Tonight we have a very special guest in Jim Bovard, and I think a lot of the students here know this. As a former student at GMU, I certainly know it. My first introduction to Jim's work was in a public policy class by Tom Rustisi, and Jim's book Lost Rights was required reading there, and as I understand it, it still is. And it is a wonderful book. If you have not read it, I could not recommend it more highly as a ghastly documentation of all the horrible things that both federal and state governments have done to trample our civil liberties. Such a wonderful book. I purchased it for my father the first semester I was here, and he still carries it around in the back of his car as for something to read when my mom goes on her shopping sprees. But Jim is our policy advisor. He has been so since September of 1994 when he started writing for our monthly print journal, Freedom Daily. And he's been writing in it ever since, a run of a little bit more than 14 years. An incredible run, and one that I hope keeps on going. He has authored 9 books, most recently Attention Deficit Democracy, as well as Lost Rights and The Bush Betrayal. He has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New Republic, Reader's Digest, and many other publications. His books have been translated into Spanish, Arabic, Japanese, and Korean. The Wall Street Journal has called Jim the roving inspector general of the modern state. And Washington Post columnist George Will called him a one-man truth squad. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Bovard.
Well, I want to thank Bart for his kind words. I want to thank Kevin for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real honor to be speaking at a school that has one of the best economic departments in the country. And it's also probably one of the few economic departments where people could actually understand how the government's wrecking the market right now. Because this is a great time to be studying economics because you're watching the old gods die off left and right. And there's a lot of complacency that's built up over the last 20, 25 years about government intervention, and there's a lot of liberals that think that they have died and gone to heaven at this point. But you know, this is all going to come crashing down at some point. I was talking to Bunker Hornberger about what would be good tonight to talk about. He said something on economics, and it strikes me as one of the real questions right now is whether free markets are passé. Because you're hearing all over the place. There was a headline in the Washington Post a few months ago. It was announced the end of capitalism. You had the article in Slate by Jacob Weisberger, their chief editor, that basically blamed libertarians for the fact that the markets were crashing. This is going back to the Tinkerbell theory of faith in government. Just as long as everybody believes government can succeed, and because there was this group of people, libertarians, who didn't believe, government crashed and burned. But it's fascinating to see how so few people in the mainstream media and how so few politicians seem to understand how much damage the government is currently doing to our lives and how much damage is going to be following through from the current surge of new interventions. It's interesting talking to an audience, a number of folks who here have read Lost Rights, which I really appreciate, and I greatly appreciate Professor, the professor who assigns the book. Looking back to 15 years ago when I was finishing writing that book, I didn't think I'd look back on that as almost like a golden age of American liberty. But in some ways, compared to what's going on now, things have gotten so much worse. And if you look at where we are right now, we are finishing 8 years of Bush-Cheney rule. We're coming off a period of increasingly authoritarian policies. We're coming off policies where the government was overtly trampling and scorning the Constitution, in which the government made torture legal, in which the government suspended habeas corpus, and acted like the government had the right to know anything about everyone. Now, a single example of how life has changed. Maybe some of you have read some of the stories about if you're traveling back from overseas and you've got your laptop with you, the federal government now claims the right to take your laptop computer away, take it in the back room, and copy all the contents. And the Department of Homeland Security is explicit that the government can do this without any individualized suspicion. All you have to be is some American coming back from abroad, and the government is entitled to copy everything in your hard drive. And if someone will not surrender their password, the government can confiscate the computer and perhaps lock you away as well. But this sounds like a fairly minor policy. It's not affecting everybody at this point, but little things like this are sea changes. And part of the sad thing is that now we have the Democrats taking over, and the Democrats say good things about civil liberties, and perhaps they'll not do as much damage on that front. But when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the rights of property owners, the rights of freedom of contract, the ability of business owners to run their own business, the Democrats tend to be far worse. And unfortunately, the GOP and the conservatives will have almost no credibility when they protest about how the Democrats are trampling the free market. Because for the last 8 years, we watched the GOP trample freedom. There have been some exceptions. There have been some great individuals on Capitol Hill, Ron Paul especially. There have been other people in the media that have spoken out. American Conservative Magazine's done some good stuff. And some of the think tanks have done excellent work. But by and large, most of the conservatives have simply rolled over in this stuff. I want to talk about some of the areas where the government is the most abusive right now, some of the latest fiascos. And I'll start out talking about the bailouts. I don't know how many different bailouts we've had in the last 7 or 8 months. You start with Bear Stearns, you go to AIG, you go to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and now we have this mother of all bailouts. And part of what's frustrating is that the public reaction. Now, the most recent book I did was called Attention Deficit Democracy, and I was very critical of average voters in that book. But when it came to the question of the bailout, the American people got it right. There was one congressman who said that the phone calls to his office were running 50-50, 50% no and 50% hell no. There was a tidal wave of opposition that the American people intuitively understood when Bush and the leaders of Congress were saying they wanted a blank check for $700 billion. The American people recognized that that was BS. And people did all they could to protest, to holler, and just try to bring down that house. But you had the news media, you had President Bush, you had leaders of Congress, both parties, that managed to push this through. And part of what was especially ugly on this, well, first of all, it's very bad economics. But even worse, it's based on blind faith in finding a dictator.